What is going on, YouTube? This is Ask the Root. So I'm going to review the sixth album by Juvenile. This album is called Juvie the Great, and it came out in late 2003. It was basically the last album for a long while that Juvenile did on Cash Money Records, where he had some hit albums like the G Code, Project English, and 400 Degrees, particularly 400 Degrees, which had songs like Back That Ass Up and some of those type songs. But I would definitely have to say this is kind of like a more recent, at least in terms for that time period, a relatively recent on Cash Money kind of hit album from Juvenile, just because this was the last one he kind of did for a while before departing. It was just interesting kind of seeing him pair up with Manny Fresh and Birdman. I mean, it's too bad that Lil Wayne isn't on here. I have no clue why Lil Wayne was not on this album at all. Lil Wayne kind of went through like a purge in 2003 and just was not really there. That was kind of his transformation and metamorphosis when he was on the verge of getting with the Carter and those albums. But yeah, you'll notice that Lil Wayne is absent on here. And really, this is just overall a swashed and just kind of whelming Cash Money Records and Juvenile album. I just would have to say it's just interesting because it does have some hits on here, but it's just not in the sheer potential that it probably could have been. I don't know if there was kind of bickering going on behind the scenes that just kind of resulted in not quite the chemistry that they had back in 1998 and 2000, some of those type times. It is a decent album, but it's not a classic and it's not close to it. I definitely feel like the singles are pretty excellent. They definitely had some good vibes. Juvenile was trying to initiate like his UTP group, which was what he would go on to manifest with after leaving Cash Money. It's too bad that both these groups could not have manifested in the same context as far as having Cash Money and UTP. But there was a UTP album that came out in 2004 that I want to look into and see some stuff about. I've been looking for information on that album for quite a bit, and it's finally starting to manifest. So I want to see about that. But yeah, there was just a number of hits on here. This is kind of an underwhelming album. It's just kind of mostly a mixed bag. I mean, at best, I could say it's a mixed bag. The singles are definitely pretty excellent, but apart from that, this is not a one hit wonder. Some folks might try to say that Juvenile is a one hit wonder. He's definitely not, but I can't really defend this album heavily just because it's just not packed the gills with overall hits. Like I would probably have to say that Carter is better than this, and probably Manny Fresh's album from 2004, The Mind of Manny Fresh, is better, and I would say Birdman's Fast Money is better. I mean, it's not to say this is a horrible album, but it just is kind of like, I don't know, it just kind of feels almost just a shade or two better than mediocre, which is not saying too much. I just would have to say. But so we'll go ahead and talk about the singles here. There were some hit singles. I definitely feel like this vibe, just particularly Juvenile, meshed really well with like the contemporary rap sound of 2003 and 2004. He was a central figure around that time, and he at least didn't have a problem with being mainstream and having some of that chartability and that type of stuff. That's just the least good thing to be able to say about it. It was just kind of the concept that, Slow Motion was such a hit, and of course it was probably pretty difficult to be able to remanufacture a song like that, but he did at least try, and there is some other stuff I'll review on later albums. But yeah, so the first single is In My Life, and back in the day I used to think that Slow Motion was like the first single. It just was odd that the promotion for Juvie the Great kind of happened more in the 2003 half of things, because Slow Motion was definitely a song of the summer of 2004, but really the promotion of that album harkened back to like, I don't know how far back in 2003. I don't know when In My Life started charting. I do remember this song, but not wholesomely as to when it first manifested. I would assume like the fall of 2003, something like that. It's a pretty regular night of a regular club track. It just feels like a club track that's just kind of regular in that sort of sense. It has a great hook on there, this kind of typical night fare. Just has a regular night kind of feel for like a club track, and it's just an overall typical kind of night there and that type of stuff. This has a real kind of interesting spark towards the vibe of it. Manny Fresh does a real excellent job on the hook, and Juvenile just teams with swag on this particular song. So it's just an overall kind of spark of a highlight, and it definitely deserved its chart potential. I would have to say it's just an overall kind of boppish kind of tune. Definitely kind of an definitely kind of an overlooked and under promoted kind of Juvenile song. It's kind of one where you don't realize that song actually did pretty well. It hit like the top 45 of the Billboard 100, so it's just a nice secondary song for Juvenile. Now, I don't know if Bounce Back was released after Slow Motion or before it, but I'm going to go ahead and say that Bounce Back was the second single, and this one has Birdman on there to kind of back him up a little bit. But this is just a real kind of summer bliss kind of song. Definitely has some energy on that song. Summer bliss kind of energy. It's a sparkling kind of beat on here. This really feels like some definitely feels like some day activity kind of going on. This heat wave kind of vibes. There's a lot of songs on this album that kind of have summery, this real summer malaise kind of feels towards it. And we'll definitely cover that as that goes along. But this is just really for like the cookouts, the barbecues, the picnics, the fanfare, just the football games, that type of stuff. As far as some of that kind of goes, it's definitely vibes for that. This Bounce Back is a good one. And then the third single is Slow Motion, which if you know just a decent amount of rap music, you probably heard this song in some fashion. This was a classic 2000s. This is definitely like a classic rap song of the 2000s decade. It's one that just has a lot of fanfare and is just overall like a continued hit that just brings you back to 2004, 2005. It lasted throughout the whole summer of 2004 into 2005. It's just a regular song on like a hot heat wave kind of day in June, July, August that song just gets regular rotation because it's just such a easy kind of one to go back to and just continues to be ubiquitous. Just a classic summer tune. It's a sprawler, definitely has a great hook, this real kind of lazy hot day kind of feel towards it. The beat is just so like guilty pleasure-esque lazy. It just really has such a highlighted kind of feel. It's just an overall nice one. Deserved to hit #1, definitely, I would have to say. So I'm going to talk about the rest of this album. Out of 13 songs, this is a relatively brief album. There are 4 skits on here out of 17 songs. That leaves it down to 13. And out of those 13 songs, I recommend to use 6 with 1 almost song. So basically 7 out of 13, 6.5 out of 13. Basically about exactly half the album. So I'll recommend those 6.5 songs to you. So they would be In My Life, Bounce Back, It Ain't Mine's, Slow Motion, Head in Advance, Down South Posted, and the almost song is Little Daddy. So to talk about an immediate highlight that I feel like is one of the best songs on this album, they definitely needed way more songs like this, is It Ain't Mine. It's kind of like a summary type version of Juvenile's version of Billie Jean by Michael Jackson. I mean, it's not bar for bar like a recoding of that, but it just kind of deals with the same kind of concept of women wanting to get pregnant, so you have to pay child support and that type of stuff as far as that kind of goes. Just a great song for that sort of concept. It Ain't Mine's is a real kind of uptown city groove for the ladies and how I described it to you. And it's just a warm weather kind of cut. This is just another kind of summer heat kind of song just for that kind of uptown kind of fanfare as far as warm weather. Definitely like the concept of it. Head in Advance is definitely a summary type tune. This one is just kind of, I feel like this is kind of one where you could be a little bit tipsy too, just having a good time, got some alcohol in your system, that type of stuff. Just a warm weather kind of barbecue, summer shindig kind of cut. It's very jivey and social. The topic's pretty straightforward in the concept of it, talking about wanting head in advance, which is a good concept as far as that kind of goes. But the topic of the song is wanting head in advance, which is a pretty straightforward and just kind of charming kind of song to kind of have in that sort of context. But you know, this is not blue collar. This is definitely in the hardcore rap kind of field. So this is not really an album to bring home to like the coworkers and that type of stuff as far as like standard kind of fanfare. But this is just all of these songs I recommend to you are just great barbecue cookout kind of moments in like a social circle that you just are seeing your regulars in life and that type of stuff, as long as they're not formal and platonic sense. Just to be able to say, Down South Posted is another nice one. This is really kind of a block party kind of tune. This one, I mean, I don't talk about block parties too oftenly enough. I don't talk about block parties too overtly oftenly, but I would like to talk about them more. And this is definitely one that seems like a block party kind of song and just really has that kind of house party kind of feel. It's definitely a house party bop and just has some evening energy. This is really kind of one that kind of gives a little bit of goosebumps just in terms of like the boppish kind of feel towards it. This really kind of has like that energy of knowing that the night's going to be good. This is not like the craziest song on the album, like the one that has like the most fanfare as far as getting ready to get tanked. I'd say Head in Advance probably is I'd say Head in Advance is probably a better one for that. And It Ain't Mine is a pretty lazy one. And In My Life is definitely like the boiler. That's probably like the most litty song on here. There's really not a sheer full-blown crazy, just completely get tanked and cranked kind of song. But I would say the Down South Post is just kind of one that should get you a little bit excited. And then Lil Daddy is the almost song. I do kind of like this beat. It's kind of a decent little beat, but the beat loop on it's a little bit repetitive. It's kind of okay. I like the summer glares in there a little bit, but the kind of thumping, plotting type stuff in there just gets a little bit repetitive. But I feel like it's kind of like a busy day kind of summer heat kind of tune, definitely for like some summer malaise. It's just kind of a bustling song, kind of reminds me almost like a hustle song, but just kind of one of those money kind of got to get some money, rubbing your hands kind of songs just for like a busy day and just getting to it and getting errands done and responsibilities done and that type of stuff. This has a lot more bustle towards it, but you know, the beat is just, if it would have had a just a notch or two better of like a beat loop, I probably would have actually recommended it. But I think in time I could probably get used to it a lot more. But for the time being, it's just kind of one I'm on the fence about. It's just kind of an in between of how that goes. I can't quite wholesomely give it the seventh song, but it is pretty close. So just to talk about some of the ones I didn't like the 6 songs I didn't like and don't recommend, like there's just kind of some awkward choices on here. Like I feel like Juvie the Great's kind of a really poor beat. I feel like For Everybody's a pretty poor one. There's just some kind of awkward ones on here that just don't sound like anything contemporary or anything that would really have like some jive or just overall kind of like bounce to them as far as having something to kind of bop to and that type of stuff. I feel like For Everybody, Juvie the Great, Fucking With Me are just kind of poor renditions of that. And Enemy Turf is just kind of an odd one. I mean, I know some of these Juvenile was not intending to just have be kind of house party bops and block party bops and club bops and some of that type of stuff. But I feel like Juvenile's kind of attempts at doing other songs that are just not quite summer ready or bounce and club ready and that type of stuff are just kind of patchy. It's kind of, I feel like, it's not to say he doesn't have those strengths. I think he probably did on like 400 Degrees and stuff, but it just feels like the production choices that he chose on this record are just very kind of spotty and awkward, and just about half the album, pretty much I would almost say over half the album if you count Lil Daddy, is just kind of not bell of the ball. And that just kind of happens to be a thing. Like they needed more beats like In My Life and Bounce Back and some of those type ones, and definitely Slow Motion, but it just kind of feels like a lot of these are just very cumbersome and unwieldy and that type of stuff. A good example of a good beat is Numb Numb, but I just didn't quite like the concept of I just didn't like the concept of The Topic Matters. Just kind of more of like a pretty rash kind of straightforward drug dealing song. Like this was kind of a harsher one. I did like the beat on there quite a bit, but this is really kind of a straightforward and kind of colder kind of song for that, just kind of in that context. And I would have to say that Cock It's kind of another one that kind of has like a summary type beat on there, but this is kind of more in like the thuggish sense where just the production doesn't add up with like the lyrics that are kind of going along with it. And I kind of felt like that's kind of a song that should have probably had a little bit more carefree and recreational kind of vibes. I mean, I know like the concept of it being a gangster rap album is kind of like that, but I kind of feel like Juvenile just didn't have the sheer amount of hits to really. I mean, he does have hits in his catalog, but just to kind of say on this album, it was kind of light to not have more bops that could have really helped stretch it out. I mean, I feel like there's at least 4 or 5 songs that do kind of have some of these cookout and kind of summer heat kind of vibes about it, but it just doesn't stretch into like the realm of being able to be wholesomely convincing. It's just kind of like where you give him some leeway, but not like the whole, not like entire leeway as to the point where it's like, yeah, this is complete all day and tomorrow kind of vibes towards it. It might be entertaining for like a couple hours, but not an all day kind of affair and an all weekend kind of affair. And that just kind of happens to be a thing. So that's just kind of the concept about it. That's a lot of these songs on here. This kind of happens to be a thing. So me liking 6.5 songs out of 13, I'm going to go ahead and give this album like a 5.75 out of 10. I mean, I think that's pretty good. I am giving it the benefit of the doubt and giving it more than an average score just because these songs are pretty good and the 3 singles are all excellent. And I feel like they do kind of bolster Slow Motion, which did hit #1. But I just kind of look after it. This album's just in short supply of like summer cuts and just overall recreational kind of vibes that could bolster this project. And I just feel like some of the other stuff that kind of gets tried just does not quite hit home and quite have it could be it's convincing, but it just is not quite compelling in the sense of just like the personality. Like 50 Cent had the ability to make songs like, you know, Don't Push Me and Many Men and some of those type songs and just differential kind of ones just kind of have that hit. But I just kind of feel like some of these are just not quite, the essential spark is just kind of missing as far as that kind of goes. I think that's just kind of the concept. But this is a decent album. It's just kind of the fact that it just is kind of somewhat mediocre in terms of being packed to the gills. So that's this kind of thing. 5.75 out of 10. The social score, I'm going to go ahead and give like a 6 out of 10 because I do like all three of the singles. I feel like some extra summery songs. Just to talk about it again, I do feel like songs like Head in Advance, It Ain't Mine, Slow Motion, and Lil Daddy and some of those type ones, and Bounce Back especially, just all have that kind of, and Down South Post is another one. These all have like really kind of block party, house party, summer kind of affairs, this cookout and barbecues and that type of stuff, kind of fanfare that just really works for it. But this is kind of the concept that I feel like there needed to be more strengths in it. This was kind of bewildering just because if Juvenile could do it in 1998, I don't know why he wasn't able to do it in 2004. It just seems kind of odd that, as he advanced, and he was still in his 20s at this time. So this was kind of underneath the impression that I would have thought that he would have been chock full of ideas to be able to do it. But it's just kind of, I don't know. That's kind of the situation about it. I mean, this is prime Juvenile. I do feel like, when he did Slow Motion and In My Life, these are prime Juvenile songs where I feel like he was more in his prime with this album than he was with 400 Degrees and G Code and some of those type ones. But I just look after it's just the fact that the album just doesn't have like the sheer artillery of extra hits to kind of be able to do it. And that's just bad. It's just kind of because it's prime, but it's not. It's kind of a dichotomy where this is peak Juvenile, but then at the same time, it just is kind of patchy. So it's this kind of thing. So in terms of the future, like I feel like Juvenile has been putting out projects. Like a few years ago, he did a dual album with Birdman, and he has been kind of dropping stuff. I've checked out some of these here and there, but I kind of want to get to some more of these. I'm definitely going to review Reality Check and probably some more of these, but for now, this is kind of a decently burner of an album. Definitely has those summer cookout kind of songs and some good fanfare on here, but yeah.